They called him the King of Western Swing, a slick-haired fiddler who could turn a Friday night dance hall into a cyclone of stomping boots and spinning skirts. But the melody that made Spade Cooley a star is not the tune that fixed his name in history. Between the first triumphant bow stroke and the last trembling heartbeat lies a story of jealousy, violence, and a courtroom spectacle so lurid that newspapers had to cut the goriest details. Keep listening, because the final curtain on this boy-turned-Hollywood cowboy didn't fall at the footlights. It dropped behind a locked bedroom door where his daughter was forced to watch her mother die. Donald Clyde Cooley entered the world on December 17, 1910, in a drafty sod house near Grand, Oklahoma, a patch of plains so remote that the nearest music store was a 2-day wagon ride away. His parents were Cherokee-descended sharecroppers who hauled their battered fiddle and banjo across the Dust Bowl frontier in search of work, and from the start, they told their boy that survival depended on 2 things: hard calluses and a song to chase the loneliness. When drought and bankers teamed up to evict half the county, the Cooleys joined the westward exodus to Oregon. There, on chilly logging camps, 8-year-old Spade learned to drown the sawmill roar by scraping jigs until the roughnecks clapped along. It was his first taste of applause, and it felt like firewater. The nickname came later during a poker game in Pendleton when a saloon owner bet a night stage slot on one hand. Cooley slapped down the ace of spades, won the pot, and the barkeep shouted, "Deal the kid in, he's Spade now." The moniker fit. He wielded his fiddle like a sharp card up the sleeve. By the late 1930s, he drifted south to Los Angeles, busking in the shadow of the brand-new Warner Brothers water tower. Hollywood's casting agents needed authentic cowboys for their B-Western assembly line, and Spade's dust road drawl and trick roping landed him walk-on roles beside Gene Autry and a young Roy Rogers. On lunch breaks, he unpacked the fiddle, pulling oil can blues from its guts until crew members danced on prop wagons. Word spread through the union halls. There was a kid downtown who could make a fiddle talk. Opportunity arrived at the Venice Pier Ballroom, a cavernous pavilion jutting over the Pacific where servicemen escaped wartime anxiety by dancing until sweat dripped from the rafters. When Bob Wills canceled a weekend booking, the manager needed a leader who could keep thousands moving. Spade claimed he could pull a band together overnight. He borrowed horn players from a Navy ensemble, lured steel guitar wizard Joaquin Murphy with a promise of double scale, and pasted his name on the marquee. That Saturday, 10,000 people showed up. They waltzed, jitterbugged, and bunny-hugged through a sound no one had heard before. Fiddle licks ricocheting off trombone blasts, jazz drum breaks underpinning cowboy yodels. The Los Angeles Times called it mountain music with chrome bumpers. Overnight, Cooley was a phenomenon, locking horns with Bob Wills for the crown of Western swing on the West Coast. Cooley's rivalry with Bob Wills became a publicity carnival. Los Angeles promoters printed posters pitting the two against each other in Battle of the Bands marathons, where spectators cast ballots at midnight. In a famous 1945 showdown at Santa Monica Civic, Cooley shocked purists by adding a drum set that thumped like swing-era Count Basie, while Wills countered with twin trumpets borrowed from a jazz outfit. The headline the next day asked, "Who is king?" Cooley framed the clipping and hung it in his living room, pointing to it whenever reporters questioned his crown. He even recorded a tune called "You're Gonna Miss Me When I'm Gone." An unsubtle jab at Wills's chart hit New San Antonio Rose. The battle boosted both men's ticket sales, but also fed the competitive flame that later consumed Cooley's sanity. Television was newborn in 1948, when KTLA executives decided country music might sell refrigerators. They built a set that looked like a saloon porch, wired it with early color cameras, and handed Cooley an hour every Saturday night. The Spade Cooley Show became appointment viewing across California, predating American Bandstand by almost a decade. Housewives sent fan letters comparing his pearly grin to Clark Gable's. Kids mimicked the speed bow trick he called the double shuffle. For 8 seasons, he averaged $2,000 a week, more than the governor, and headlined films like Detour and The Kid from Gower Gulch. But fame widened the fault lines in his psyche. He bragged that Bob Wills may have invented the style, but he, Spade, was the one who took it to television. Behind that swagger lurked a terror of being replaced. Ella Mae Evans stepped into this maelstrom in 1942, hired as a vocalist fresh from a church choir in Fresno. Photographs show her in a gingham dress, dimples deep enough to store secrets. Spade divorced his first wife and married Ella Mae in Las Vegas on December 9, 1945. At first she was a good luck charm. His single, Shame on You, topped the country chart for 13 weeks, and the couple posed for magazines beside their silver Airstream trailer. Yet the marriage housed a covert war. Cooley installed private detectives to tail her, ordered bandmates to report if she smiled too long at a steel guitarist, and once pistol-whipped a janitor he suspected of flirting. Road manager Smokey Rogers later told interviewers that Spade could flip from laughter to rage in one breath, like someone yanking a radio dial into static. Ella Mae learned to read the veins bulging in his neck the way sailors read weather fronts. The year 1956 marked a turning point. Elvis Presley hit the charts, advertisers chased younger tastes, and KTLA canceled Cooley's show. He tried to pivot by hosting rodeos at his ranch and leasing a nightclub in Santa Monica, but box office returns shrank. Alcohol filled the vacuum. Friends noticed he switched from sipping Four Roses to guzzling straight from the bottle, chewing the glass lip like a dog worrying a bone. He accused Ella Mae of planning to run off with a Hollywood producer. When she denied it, he punished her by firing half the household staff so she would have to muck horse stalls. On nights when he couldn't sleep, he'd play old acetates of Bob Wills and mutter that the wrong man wore the crown. The anxiety metastasized into something lethal. April 3, 1961, began like any other at the Waterwheel Ranch. Roosters crowed, irrigation pumps droned, and Ella Mae drove their children Melody and Donald Jr. to Bakersfield for school. Cooley spent the morning pacing the parlor, knocking back shots of Cutty Sark and rehearsing accusations. When Ella Mae returned around 2, he invited her to the master bedroom to talk things over. Court transcripts later showed the conversation lasted 90 minutes and ended in torture. Cooley slammed her head against the marble floor, then wrapped a telephone cord around her neck. He crushed her left wrist with his boot heel, burned her thigh with a cigarette, and repeated, according to Melody, "You're going to die," until the words lost meaning. Ella Mae's final heartbeat was recorded at 5:10 p.m., bruises blossoming across her body like spilled ink. Melody, 15 and trembling, had entered midway through the assault after hearing her mother's screams ricochet down the hall. Spade ordered her to sit in a chair and watch. "This is what happens to women who fool around," he snarled. When Ella Mae lay motionless, he turned to his daughter and said, "Now we'll see what the law does to me." Melody escaped to a neighbor's house the moment he left the room for another drink. She dialed the sheriff with shaking fingers. Deputies arrived to find Cooley wiping blood from his boots, claiming Ella Mae had fallen in the shower. Crime scene photos refuted him. Telephone cord still knotted at her throat, cigarette burns smelling of nicotine, and assault marks inconsistent with any fall. The king of Western swing was cuffed in his own living room, a crowd of ranch hands staring as the squad car kicked up dust. The trial opened in Bakersfield Superior Court on July 18, 1961, and reporters jostled for seats the way teenagers once fought for dance floor space at the Pier Ballroom. Prosecutor Frank Keene showcased 31 photographs of injuries, a medical examiner who compared Ella Mae's shattered ribs to a car crash victim, and Melody's tear-choked testimony that left several jurors openly weeping. Defense attorney P. Barton Reed argued that Spade had suffered acute psychosis of jealousy, triggered by Ella Mae's alleged confession to an affair. But the prosecution read aloud her diary, found beneath a dresser drawer, which chronicled years of fear and a plan to file for divorce after Easter. On August 15th, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Cooley withdrew his insanity plea, perhaps hoping for future parole, and Judge William Bradshaw handed down a life sentence at the state penitentiary. Prison did not silence him. It merely changed his audience. At Vacaville Medical Facility, he formed a 16-piece inmate orchestra, convinced the warden to let KTLA film a Christmas special from the rec yard, and bragged in letters that he was studying scripture with the same intensity he once gave chord charts. Some corrections officers described him as polite and remorseful. Others recalled crude jokes about how his wife got what she deserved. The parole board cited exemplary conduct when, in early 1969, it floated the possibility of release within 12 months. Cooley's supporters in the Sheriff's Reserve of Alameda County organized a benefit show to prove he could behave in public. Under heavy guard, he exited the prison gates on November 21st with a new suit, a Stradlin fiddle, and a doctor's note declaring him fit for travel. Behind walls, he cultivated an image of the redeemed sinner. He volunteered in the prison hospital, wheeling polio patients to the yard for sunshine, and persuaded administrators to let him run a weekly music theory class. Transcripts of his parole hearings reveal he quoted scripture fluently and claimed to have composed a gospel suite titled Strings of Salvation. Some advocates, including Hollywood friends who still owed him favors, sent letters to Governor Ronald Reagan urging early release, arguing that Cooley could serve as a cautionary speaker against domestic violence, an irony lost on no one who remembered Ella Mae's shattered bones. Women's groups counter-lobbied, mailing photographs of the crime scene to the governor's office with captions that read, "This is what redemption looks like?" The debate raged in op-ed columns for months. 2 nights later, 3,000 law enforcement families packed the Oakland auditorium. The band struck up Cold, Cold Heart, and Cooley, visibly gaunt but grinning, eased into the spotlight. Witnesses said he looked 10 years younger once the bow touched the strings. After 90 minutes, he announced, "Folks, this is the finest audience I ever played for. I'll see you all again real soon." He walked backstage, sat in a folding chair, and collapsed. Coronary occlusion, the coroner ruled. Years of whiskey and nerves had shredded the vessels around his heart. It was 11:10 p.m., November 23rd, 1969. The parole hearing scheduled for January would never convene. In a single weekend, he tasted freedom and paid the bill with his life. Those who attended the Oakland show later described a mood bordering on surreal. Uniformed deputies served coffee and donuts in the lobby, while a convicted murderer warmed up backstage. Cooley opened with a medley that included San Antonio Rose, perhaps a nudge at Bob Wills across the grave, and followed with Heartbreak Trail, delivered at a tempo so brisk the horn section struggled to keep up. In a dark twist, he dedicated Shame on You to the gathered lawmen, grinning at the lyric, "You made me cry when you said goodbye." Some audience members clapped, others shifted uneasily, aware of the song's new context. A sheriff's captain later told the Associated Press that Cooley seemed determined to prove he still owned a crowd. "He walked off stage like a champion," the captain said, "but he left this world the same villain he entered it." The quotation ran nationwide, reigniting debate about whether talent should ever soften judgment. News of the death divided the country music world. Some, like Merle Travis, muttered that prison had not been long enough. Others wondered whether a man who died performing charity had earned a sliver of redemption. Record stores quietly removed his albums to avoid protests. Radio programmers who once played Detour every lunch hour now refused to spin it. Yet the story refused burial. Every few years, a journalist or podcaster digs up the court transcripts, and TikTok creators clip the grainy color footage of the Spade Cooley show, overlaying it with sinister strings. Audiences discover the smiling fiddler, learn about the torture, and feel the cognitive dissonance crack like ice underfoot. Cooley's tale has become a grim parable about the perils of unchecked ego. The bigger the band, the louder the applause, the easier it was for violence to hide in plain sight. Music historians credit him with popularizing the twin fiddle attack that still underpins modern country, yet his name rarely appears in the Country Music Hall of Fame lobby. Melody, who testified against her father, retreated from public life and, according to rare interviews, keeps a single photograph of her mother on the piano, proof that even victorious witnesses carry scars. In 2024, Trucking Life magazine published a feature headlined "Detoured Down a Murderous Path," ranking Cooley alongside Phil Spector in the pantheon of musicians whose songs outlived their sins. If Spade Cooley shows how fame can warp a psyche, Jerry Lee Lewis shows how scandal can cling like a scorch mark even when the courts refuse to brand it criminal. Nicknamed the Killer for smashing piano benches with his heel, Lewis detonated career momentum in 1957 when journalists learned his bride, Myra Gale Brown, was 13 and his cousin. Audiences booed, concerts were canceled, yet his comeback in the 70s proved that rock and roll forgives almost anything if the boogie is hot enough. Then came the night of August 23, 1983. Shawn Stevens, his fifth wife, lay dead on a bed inside their Mississippi ranch house just 77 days after the wedding. The autopsy cited methadone toxicity, but bruises on her arms suggested a struggle. Friends told United Press International that Shawn had been trying to quit pills. An investigative piece years later painted a murky tableau of bloodstains, broken glass, and an angry rock legend pacing the hallway with a .38 revolver tucked into his waistband. A grand jury declined to indict, and Lewis dismissed accusations as gossip pushed by jealous rivals. Still, when People magazine revisited the case after his 2022 death at 87, it quoted family members who called the official story unfinished business. The whispers surrounding Lewis only multiplied. Observers recalled that his fourth wife, Jaren Pate, had drowned in a backyard pool in 1982 after filing for divorce, and that his son Steve drowned in 1962 at age 3. Statistics grim enough to fuel tabloid headlines. A 1983 Rolling Stone excerpt claimed federal agents briefly looked into Shawn's death, but found evidence mishandled by local officers. Biographer Rick Bragg later wrote that the housekeeper heard a thud hours before paramedics arrived, followed by Lewis shouting, "I told her not to leave me." No charges stuck, yet by the time of his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, camera crews preferred to focus on the piano pyrotechnics rather than the unsolved questions. Lewis, ever the provocateur, once told a reporter, "If I was the devil they say I am, I'd already be an H.E., son." Spade Cooley and Jerry Lee Lewis never met, but their legends now share a back room in the archives of American music, a place where footlights cast long shadows and applause sometimes drowns out screams. One died in handcuffs, another under a cloud of suspicion, yet both remind us that charisma can be a camouflage, and that the distance between a cheering crowd and a crime scene can be crossed in the time it takes a song to end. The next time you hear a jaunty fiddle line or pounding piano boogie, remember there might be ghosts riding the rhythm, urging you to look a little closer at the man who owns the spotlight. Some dance floors never echo again, yet vinyl endures. Lift the needle and the old refrain returns, reminding us that melody can outlive justice, but memory seldom forgets. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.